deliver a video message on behalf of the government of Japan. A wide range of challenges, such as COVID-19 pandemic, rising food and energy prices caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and climate changes are threatening Africa's stability. It is just timely to address the theme of this forum, Africa in an era of cascading risk and climate vulnerability, pathways for a peaceful, resilient, and sustainable future. Japan has been taking part in this forum since its first edition and putting great value on this forum. One of the objectives of this forum is supporting African-led efforts toward peace and stability in Africa, and it is exactly in line with Japan's effort through the TCAT process. I would like to talk about 3 points today based on the theme of this forum. First of all, let me highlight the importance of tackling climate change issues and addressing conflict prevention and peace building. If Egypt were host COP27 in November this year, Japan would like to pay tribute to Egypt for its leadership in the sectors of climate change as well as peace and stability in the region. Climate change is one of the biggest challenges affecting peace and stability in Africa. To realize sustainable peace, it is essential to tackle climate change issues as well as address conflict prevention and peace building, and to enhance resilience of the region. Japan is making effort to address climate change, which at the same time contribute to regional stability, such as capacity building project for sustainable forest conservation in the Congo Basin, including Cameroon and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Japan is also supporting Africa's own capacity building in the field of conflict prevention and peace building. Japan has provided a total of approximately $112 million, including a total of approximately $13 million for triple CPA of Egypt, and dispatched 63 training instructors for peacekeeping training centers in 15 countries in Africa. Japan decided to provide about $6.3 million this year to support the stabilization of the Liptako-Buruma area in the Sahel region. Furthermore, in order to support AU's initiative in the field of peace and security, we have been contributing to AU Peace Fund since 1996, contributing to conflict prevention and conflict resolution in Africa. Secondly, I would like to emphasize African-led efforts to build sustainable and stable democratic institutions. Japan highly appreciates African-led efforts to build sustainable and stable democratic institutions, which was discussed at the African Union Extraordinary Summit on Terrorism and Unconstitutional Changes in Africa, held in Malabo at the end of last month. We renewed our recognition that rules and the principles of virtuous governance are fundamental to maintain and enhance peace and stability in Africa and in the international community. Japan has been supporting Africa to address the root causes of conflict under the principle of New Approach for Peace and Stability in Africa, namely NAPSA. Japan will continue to support African-led initiatives to address unconstitutional changes of governments and to consolidate democracy through supporting transparent and fair elections, as well as building institutions and strengthening governance. Last but not least, food crisis is a pressing issue, especially in Africa. We are deeply concerned about the adverse effect of soaring food and energy prices on African development caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Food crisis is an imminent challenge which could be a factor of regional instability. Japan has been providing short-term emergency food assistance and mid-long-term assistance, such as support for agricultural product capacity. While the international community is facing various challenges, Japan would like to reiterate the importance of free and open international order based on the rule of law. Japan will continue to work with African countries under the vision of free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP, announced at TICAD 6, in order to realize peace and prosperity in the Asian-African region and in the world. Japan will hold TICAD 8 in Tunisia this August. Japan is determined to continue contributing to peace and stability in Africa through TICAD 8. Thank you for your attention.
No, thank you very much to the government of Japan and to TICAD for that intervention. And thank you all for coming so early this morning. I know it's not necessarily easy to get up and start going before coffee, but here we are. So very thankful to be here today, very privileged to be talking on such a critical issue in such an important setting, Egypt leading into COP27. And many of you may have heard some of the key takeaways from yesterday's first day. But as far as I was concerned, what I heard was community-based action, 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 and let's come up with something tangible and concrete going towards COP27. The ambassador just mentioned a number of the challenges that the world is being confronted with. I don't need to go through those. But it's going to be a difficult time leading up to COP27. And it's in all our interests to ensure that the African COP is a successful COP. And so one of the key elements which I'll be asking our panelists today, because we're all very much engaged in needing a successful COP, including the distinguished representative from Mozambique, is we're all being impacted by climate change. And while I heard a lot about security and terrorism and the need for peace yesterday, it's so important that we look at the underlying causes for those challenges. And that is human security, that is dignity. It's about setting the scene for a dignified, sustainable future. And so in the discussion that we have today, I applaud my friends here to be sort of coming up with concrete recommendations. And I dare say at the end of each intervention, I will sort of say, this is the recommendation which came from Claudio or from Namira or from Carolyn or from Kamal, because I think it's super important that when we come to these events, we just don't leave at the same point that we entered. Whether it's partnerships, whether it's collaboration, we have to be moving the dial in the right direction. So that being said, my name's Andrew Harper. I'm the Special Advisor to the High Commissioner for Refugees on Climate Action, and we've got a super cast in front of us today. I'll briefly say who they are, and then we'll go through the interventions and the questions. We have got a limited time, so I'll be asking again whether we can sort of keep to 5 or 7 minutes per intervention. Because one of the issues that also came up, including myself, one of the issues that did come up last night was the request for more interaction with the plenary. So let's see how that goes. So we just had the ambassador of TICAD. I've got Claudio Afonso next to me, and this is super important because Mozambique is very much on the front lines. Claudio is the National Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Land and Environment, from the People's Republic of Mozambique. Welcome, Claudio. Next, Claudio, is Carolyn Dumas, a good friend from a long time. Carolyn is the Director General Special Envoy for Migration and Climate Action from IOM. Then we have Namira Nigam, who is now a very close friend, who's the Director of the African Migration Observatory from the African Union. Super important. We've got Kamal Amakrane, hopefully online. And Kamal is he's the director of the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative. Kamal, are you online, just to make sure? Inshallah. Okay. Then we've got Hamdou Dosuma. Hamdou is the Acting Director and Manager for the Climate and Green Growth Division of the African Development Bank, AFDB. Then we've also got Hajir Malim, the Regional Director of the Horn of Africa, of the Horn in Eastern Africa, the Action Against Hunger, a super important NGO working in many hotspots in Africa. And at the end, we've got Benjamin Pole, a good friend also from Adelphi, from the Climate Diplomacy and Security Program. And so we have to make sure that we get on time so we can listen to Benjamin at the end as well. So that being said, I don't think I really need to reiterate too much about what we already know, that climate change is leading, aggravating some of the underlying reasons for population movements. But why it's so interesting to have such a wide array of panelists today as well is that it's becoming more complicated in order to understand why people are moving. Is it due to conflict? Is it due to poor governance? Is it due to a lack of food security? Is it just the recognition that people will move from small farm holdings to urban settings? Is it a situation of mega trends? So this is why we need to be having a much better understanding of some of the key drivers, one of which is climate and whether people are living in a peaceful existence and what is their future. And so I think what's behind us at the moment is so important. It's got peace, progress, prosperity, but you could also go the other way. You can only have peace if you've got development and progress and a future. So these are the key elements. And one of the reasons why I'm here from the Refugee Agency is we passed 100 million people who have been displaced in the world. The way which we're working at the moment is not appropriate for dealing with the challenges that are confronted with us. So let's try and find out ways in which we can move and work in a different way. So Claudio, over to you first, and thank you very much for coming here. Mozambique is obviously on the front lines of many challenges, both climate-driven, but also challenges with development and conflict. It is, I don't want to say a fragile state because it was brought to my attention last night that fragility is probably not in many aspects the right term. Maybe it's the vulnerable state to climate change. So how can we, in light of this, in the third and last period of the implementation of the National Strategy for Climate Change in Mozambique, what are the current gaps on the operational level in building the resilience of displaced communities, and there are many in Mozambique, in the face of the recurrent climate and security risks? To what extent does the Ministry of Land and Environment integrate conflict sensitivity in its disaster risk reduction and climate risk management action plans? It's a long question, but I'm sure you've got a succinct answer. Thanks, Claudio.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. And please allow me to start my intervention thanking the government of Egypt for inviting us to share our experience on climate change. This acknowledgement is extended to all those who directly or indirectly participate in the organization of this important event. Well, Mozambique is a country located in the eastern part of the African continent with a coastline of 2,700 kilometers, exposed to an intertropical convergence zone. Due to its geographical location, the country is one of the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change and ranked in the top 10 countries most affected by extreme events. These events have been causing significant impacts on Mozambique society. For example, from 2019 to now, about 1,200,000 people were affected and 200 deaths were recorded. During the same period, 4,000 schools, 42 hospitals, 58,000 houses were destroyed and 100,000 houses partially destroyed, causing an accumulated deficit estimated at more than 12 million USD dollars. To minimize these effects of climate change, the government of Mozambique has been taking strategical measures where we highlight the following: approval of the National Strategy for Adaptation and Mitigation of Climate Change for the period of 2013 to 2025, which among several aspects defines adaptation as national priority. In December of 2021, the country submit its first update NDC that cover the period of 2020 and 2025 to the Convention Secretariat, which highlights, in addition to mitigation actions, adaptation actions. We already elaborate about 125 local adaptation plans, with only 29 plans to be elaborated. Regarding the implementation of local adaptation plans, we would like to highlight the practice of performance-based financing, practice of multi-use water supply systems, practice of platform for dialogue and assistance, and the practice of monitoring and evaluation as some good practice in the process of implementing adaptation actions. Going special to your question, we would like to mention the needs that Mozambique has for, number one, improve legislation on climate change. In this perspective, the environmental law is being updated, which will incorporate aspects of climate change. Number two, massification of standards for building climate resilience. Number three, improve institutional coordinations at all levels, from local, province to central level. Number four, improve our capacity to mobilize technological and financial resources for the implementation of action on climate change. Regarding the integration of conflict sensitivity in its risks in disaster reduction and climate risk management action plans, it is important to mention that the country is developing specific actions for each reality. For example, at the moment, the country is implementing the MOS North project in the province of Cabo Delgado, Nampula, and Niassa, northern part of Mozambique, financed by the World Bank in order to improve the resilience of families vulnerable to conflict as well as extreme events.
Fantastic. That was like you hit the nail on the head in terms of not only the time, but in terms of coming up with some concrete recommendations, including the focus on adaptation, and not only talking about adaptation, but the fact that there's already 125 local adaptation plans with only 29 to be elaborated. So given the issues also about how do we use water resources much more effectively, dialogue with communities, focus on M&E, improved legislation. So in many aspects, you almost undertook the to-do list for many areas which are being impacted. So Congratulations for that. So over to Carolyn now. Carolyn, again, IOM is a very close partner and friend of UNHCR. And in terms of the work that IOM is doing particularly in building the resilience of displaced communities, which is at the heart of your policy and practice, in order to, which is also part of the nexus of strengthening humanitarian assistance, peace, development and security. What I would be interested to know is that midway through the implementation phase of IOM's Continental Strategy for Africa, which sounds very impressive, what are the best practices and lessons learned so far in attempting to advance durable solutions and mitigate the negative impacts of conflict, disaster, environmental degradation, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings? And in light of the upcoming COP27, what are IOM's key strategic areas of focus for Africa in this area? So again, following on from what Claudio has just presented, really clear and concise action points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning to each of you. Good morning to all. Maybe if you allow, well, I would like first, just before answering the two questions, I would like to thank the Aswan Forum for this invitation, and of course congratulate the Aswan Forum for this third edition. This one is better. Thank you. So I'll shift on the other side. And now I just wanted to join Claudio, yes, in thanking Aswan Forum for its invitation, congratulating as well Aswan Forum for that third edition, which supported. Is that? It's okay. I can speak this side. Do you hear me? Yes, better. So no. A third thanks to Aswan Forum. Congratulations for the progress, and we are, precisely as IOM, very happy to be able to participate in that third edition. We've supported Aswan Forum since the start, but I must say, being, working on climate, that I'm even more, I'm happier, if I can say, to participate in this session dedicated to largely dedicated to contribute to COP27. Maybe 2 or 3 points. The Climate Displacement Nexus and the focus on this nexus in this session is very timely for 2 reasons. First, well, at least 2 reasons. It's, of course, extremely timely for many reasons, but I would like just to recall that IPCC report, Working Group 2 report emphasized the fact that the threat, climate change threat, is a strong threat now, increasing threat for the planet and for the people, which is the focus of the last IPCC report. It is as well an important nexus that we could observe as well in the review of the Global Compact for Migration. The review happened last month in New York, in the IMRF, and it was evident that a growing number of countries absolutely wished to include climate change and the fight against climate change, the building of resilience of the populations inside the Global Compact, including a good number of countries of Africa. So it's very timely. Second, we all know that climate change is not the main driver for the moment, at least, and there are lots of researches and studies about that, but still it is an important driver for displacement and a multiplier. Third point, maybe, seen from IOM, when we talk of security, if I can say, we talk of human security. We have that prism of human security integrating or putting is not really a nice word, but people at the center of our strategies, even if we work so in conflict areas, countries, putting the person and the individual security at the center while working on the global context. So maybe to answer the first question about where, I mean, or how we work midway to the implementation of the Continental Strategy of IOM on Africa, I would say that first maybe to recall the Continental Strategy, the large strategy which was prepared by IOM with its African partners, focuses on better governance of African migration to foster inclusive and sustainable development. But it's the other way around as well. Comfort and work and strengthen sustainable development, of course, to reach a better governance of African migration. The strategy does recognize the impact of climate change and disasters and environmental degradation on the prospects of peace, of development. And we have put priority on durable solutions and sustainable development, to say it, if I can say simply. In many fragile and conflict-affected countries in Africa, IOM is working at the community level. We are implementing community stabilization activities to help diffuse tensions, which is the main aim, and to help diffuse tensions mostly now or more and more over scarce resources. And we so try to promote an integrated resource management approach, trying to strengthen vulnerable communities and strengthen their resilience to disasters. So midway to the strategy, we propose to actually continue on three levels approach. An approach based on data and knowledge production, policy work, and then thirdly, community-based and nature-based actions. So data and knowledge production is absolutely crucial. We try to really intensify the work on assessing, evaluating the extent to which environment factors affect human stability, security, and human mobility. So we work, for instance, with data tracking, displacement tracking matrix. We have integrated in that matrix indicators of climate change, environmental degradation. We have as well another tool that we apply in West and Central Africa, which is a transhumance tracking tool, which helps, to assess in different areas of West Africa to provide, reliable statistical data on the transhumance flows to local, national, and regional authorities. Policy work means in Western Africa, for instance, working with ECOWAS, precisely to strengthen their thematic working group on migration dialogue for West Africa, migration on climate change. We do as well participate in a broader UN, the UN Regional Secretariat and the UN, we participate in the Secretariat, of the UN Regional Working Group on Climate Change, Environment, Security, and Development. We as well try to work third level on community-based and nature-based solutions. This is the case of many projects that we develop, for instance, in Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire. Yes, well, I have to say a few words about COP very quickly, or I answer them afterwards, if you prefer. Okay, well, so you've understood, and we are a lot in Eastern Africa, Somalia, Sudan, on these levels as well. COP, I would answer the question saying, first of all, what we want is not really a question or how IOM wants to work. We want to be first, or will work, and we are working, respectful of African states and African Union choices, needs, choices, priorities. And we are engaged in a global dialogue at all levels with our partners, African partners, states, African Union, and of course the Egyptian presidency on that. I would say 3 words. We will work more and focus on mitigation efforts, on water, food, but as well women facing climate and cities, and peace, sustaining peace. We will work on adaptation to increase preventive measures and the institutional dimension of it, including, the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation, Glasgow Dialogue, and the financial dimension of adaptation and the financial needs for loss and damage. So I will stop there, and we all have to contribute, of course, maybe to highlight now the displacement. And we want to really achieve a better recognition of human mobility linked to climate change in that COP. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yeah. You've got to tap it. So some of the key points that I picked up from the presentation was the focus on human security, people at the centre, sustainable development, community stabilization, which I think goes back to the issue of development, human dignity, how do we support adaptation, as was mentioned before. You mentioned the 3 key areas, data and knowledge production, particularly in collaborative manner. I think is super important. Nature-based solution and your policy work and interaction with regional institutions in order to ensure that we're not too disengaged from what the requirements are from the institutions which are on the ground very much. So thank you very, very much for that, Caroline. Now going more into, can't say more into Africa after we've been talking about Mozambique, but Namira, who is the director for the African Migration Observatory for the AU, super important role, particularly given the role that the AU has coming into COP27. So in seeking to advance the AU's Agenda 2063, and particularly Aspiration 3, the AU encourages its member states to recognise the importance of good governance and development in confronting the challenges posed by forced displacement. And again, we have to, I think this is super important, that many entities would say people are moving because of climate change. People are not necessarily moving because of climate change. People are moving because the lack of capacity or the lack of adaptation or of poor governance. So many issues, the root causes is of governance. So that Aspiration 3 is super important. In your capacity as the director of the African Migration Observatory, how can the collection and development of information on climate-induced displacement contribute to improving the overall governance regime in Africa, bearing in mind that the interplay between conflict and climate change can hinder the capacities of governments to conceive coherent migration policies? Not a simple or easy task. So over to you, Namira.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for Aswan Forum for inviting me, and thanks, Andrew, for the introduction. I'll pick up from where Caroline mentioned in relation to the forced displacement data. The forced displacement data in relation to who, where, why, and to where has many gaps in the continent. There is no international system in place to capture comparative data on climate-related displacement. The situation in Africa is no different. Comprehensive data sets on environmental migration or planned relocation do not yet exist in the continent. While many countries and organizations are providing data to the best of their ability, there are significant differences in the terms and criteria being used. In particular, many displacement statistics include temporary evacuations, which may distort the true picture if we're looking into long-term durable solutions. Some of the current good sources for displacement data internationally can be found in the IOM's displacement tracking matrix, which is a system used to track and monitor disaster displacement and population mobility, and the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center's global report on international displacement, which is a source of data primarily focused on internal displacement from sudden onset hazards, among others, especially monitoring global trends such as rural to urban displacement, as well as policy and operational practices. Why is data important? Data is crucial to understand how different forms of mobility can help reduce loss and damage and increase benefits associated with a changing environment. This is at the heart of the observatory work. Collecting and analysis migration data and a capacity building that will assist African Union member states to provide policy guidance on climate change impacts on migration are the core mandate of the observatory. Let me translate the size of the challenge into numbers. You heard the challenge in Mozambique. But when it comes to the continent, so far, a study estimated that approximately 86 million people will be displaced within sub-Saharan Africa by 2050. Moreover, the World Bank estimates that also by 2050, up to 38.5 million people could be compelled to move within the Lake Victoria Basin countries due to climate factors. Within the Western Africa region, we may witness up to 32 million people moving within their own countries due to climate factors. It is noted that the Sahel region is facing one of the world's fastest growing displacement crises due to the combination of political instability, violence, food cuts, and climate crisis. This region is home to 2.86 million internally displaced people, a tenfold increase from 10 years ago. Having said that, the observatory is looking forward to improve the quality and consistency of data in Africa, including the implementation of a standardized framework for collecting displacement data. But what is the importance of this data apart from understanding the causes of the forced displacement by different climate crises like floods, heat waves, and/or droughts? In fact, analyzing trends of disaster-related displacement will assist us in knowing the expected number of people who are on the move and unable to return to their homes due to their destruction or the repeated nature of climate-induced shocks, meaning they must ultimately settle and integrate elsewhere. How many of them will be moving within their own country or to the nearby urban areas? Do they have funds to pay for their movement to settle in another place, or they will cause burdens on the new destinations? In which manner this displacement will strain existing electricity grids, lead to urban water shortages, as well as low crop productivity that may lead to urban food insecurity. Let's not forget that usually this migration lacks the resources or ability to generate funds to assist large influxes of inhabitants and are often not sites of large-scale humanitarian or development funding. All this we need to know in order to adopt evidence-based decisions, as clearly indicated in the AU Humanitarian Summit held in Malabo in May 22. If we do not invest more money to mitigate current and future humanitarian needs, we shall counter new waves of displacement resulting from climate change and other humanitarian disasters, and the humanitarian situation in Africa will further deteriorate. Consequently, investing in collecting information will assist us in providing better guidance for improving the overall governance of not only migration, but also in all aspects of life. Once we have credible data, planned relocation policies can be put in place in order to assist migrants to rebuild their lives in new destinations within the same borders, which will lead to less illegal migration across borders. Moreover, we can make planned urban expansion a priority. Research shows that most forced migrants end up in poorer areas of cities and often in already overpopulated informal settlements. As these numbers increase and as hazards hit cities themselves, it is crucial to ensure ongoing access to basic resources, in part through spatial planning and infrastructure development. Data will also assist us in climate awareness campaigns, early action and relief responses to any crisis, which in order to minimize the negative impacts not only in saving lives and financial damages, but also in diffusing tensions that may quickly escalate into serious conflicts. Furthermore, adaptation plans for the displaced in the new settlements with good management of food, water resources, and creating jobs for them will all contribute tremendously in minimizing the negative impacts of the displacements. At the end of the day, good governance and wise management of resources is vital to encounter the challenges resulting from forced displacement. It can turn the negative impacts into an opportunity to build new communities with better economic prospects. This won't happen without evidence-based policies in which the Observatory, in collaboration with all the partners, is looking forward to contribute in order to improve data and propose successful implementable future solutions. When we propose solutions, listen to us, which is my recommendation for today. It's crucial to assist in building the capacity of African nations in putting out strategies and implementing them, and work with the African Union in implementing its migration policy framework for Africa. I thank you. I hope I stuck to the time.
Yeah, you were spot on, Namira. Thank you very, very much. And it was beyond me to sort of even listen more to about what the AU is planning. But I think we'll be hearing a little bit more, particularly from Kamal and from Benjamin, also in terms of how important it is to look at the data, the evidence to inform policy and decision making. And some of the key elements which you raised, which I fully endorse, how do we ensure that there's a standardized framework for looking at displacement, but also understanding the key drivers of displacement. This is where it's going to be interesting to talk to Kamal about, or listen to Kamal in terms of the human mobility side of things. Evidence-based, decision-based, and you also identified that people are going to move, irrespective of climate change. There is urbanisation going on. It's been going on for a long time. I think one of the challenges is to understand what is forced and what is voluntary. And if it's forced, how can we look at mitigating those key drivers, but also understanding where people are going to move to. There's this often a xenophobic approach from many parts of Europe, which says we're all going to be inundated by people coming from Africa. The issue is the vast majority, well, almost all movements within Africa, all movements in Africa are within the borders or within the regions. So it's all about building up the capacity, ensuring the infrastructure is ready for those movements. But also something which is often underestimated is the fact that when you do have this rural-urban movement, when people move to urban environments, they're also being at risk because many of the cities are close to areas which are likely to be inundated, do not have the infrastructure. So to invest in the future really means investing in cities as much as anything. Kamal, great to see you online, friend. So getting straight into it, over the course of 2020, 2022, and on the margins of COP27, the African Climate Mobility Initiative will address the challenges of climate-forced mobility in the African continent through the preparation of a comprehensive report on climate-forced mobility in the continent, as well as an agenda for action. So no small task as well. So what I'd like to ask you, in light of the reinforcing cycle between climate disasters and displacement dynamics, which is aggravated within conflict and fragility-affected settings, I'll make that vulnerability-affected settings, to what extent will the ACME report reflect on peace building and peace considerations while addressing the drivers of climate-induced displacement in Africa? So again, over to Kamal Amakrane, the Director of ACME. Good to see you online. Kamal, over.
Thank you, Andrew, and greetings to all. Greetings, Egypt. I'm very happy and pleased to be with you today, and I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the S1 Forum for this invitation. The Africa Climate Mobility Initiative is an undertaking of the African Union Commission, the UN, and here we have colleagues already sitting at the table, IOM, UNFCCC, UNDP, and the World Bank. And this undertaking aims towards the acknowledgement of what has been already said before. The forced displacement and forced migration are the human face of the climate crisis. And as it relates to the African continent, a wide or large number of populations, of communities will be disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. The initiatives and its core partners aim at generating political momentum to advance people-centered climate action. It also aims at generating a common agenda in order to ensure the needed focus going towards 2030 and the achievement of the SDGs and the ambitions of the 2060 agenda. Last but not least, as we speak about people, and as it was mentioned earlier by colleagues, it's how do we sustain our action? And it became quite evident that sustaining our action and our effort, ensuring lasting impact, is to ensure that these solutions are locally anchored, informed by regional dimensions and affinities, and press forward tailored approaches rather than silver bullets. And this brings me pretty much to the issue of adaptation resilience and how we should build pathways towards adaptation, pathways towards resilience. Because as we have grown, the knowledge has grown around the continent with Casablanca, Nairobi, and other parts of the continent. We need different pathways, but we need a common approach, and we need strengthened focus. The Africa Climate Mobility Initiative, in approaching these challenges, and as was just mentioned by my dearest friend Namira, has at the core of it three pillars. And the first one is knowledge. How can we build the knowledge, and how can we understand today's realities, and pretty much try to understand what are the potential or possible futures. And as such, we have conducted over the last 2 years a very exhaustive desk review, but also qualitative research. We have visited several locations in the continent, current hotspots impacted by climate mobility, and pretty much try to understand the thinking process and the decision-making process and the levels of vulnerability that are involved in the climate mobility of specific communities. But most importantly, we have built a cutting-edge modeling model in order to project with very high confidence along 2 different SSPs, 2 different RSPs, up to 16 possibilities, the future hotspots, where people are going to move to and where people are going to move from as a result of climate risks, purely climate risks. And as such, as it was mentioned by Namira, we are able to identify these hotspots, we are able to tailor the response, we are able, to be precise, to anticipate, to plan, to empower and protect. We have now, thanks to the modeling work, thanks to the consultations that were conducted in follow-up to these 2 exercises, including over 180 entities across the globe and the continent, we are able to work closely with relevant governments, with relevant communities, in order to look at how to adapt, how to build resilience, and how to adjust. Now, what is interesting, and as it relates to this, to the event today, is one, I would like to acknowledge that the right framing that was put forward by the AS1 Forum, it's a better framing as we bring forward sustainable peace rather than security. For the reasons that was just mentioned by Andrew, it's an issue of livelihood, it's an issue of climate risks, it's an issue of proper planning and proper response. I don't think we should blame easily governance, but there are some factors that requires more than one hand to clap. On this one, as you see the hotspots approach, building on what was mentioned earlier, avoiding the levels of country vulnerability or country fragility, but going down to the hotspots, to the communities, to the neighborhoods, and the fragility when it comes to social cohesion. We see the potential and the future front lines where sustaining peace could be undermined. And as such, we stand really now in our second phase beyond COP27, where we plan to bring all this forward, to work with governments in order to build dedicated blueprints, and that's something we are taking forward to COP27. We have already, at the request of 5 governments, working on bringing the knowledge down to the national level. We are working with specific cities to bring it down to the city level and working hotspots. I have to share with you a couple of early findings. One is the African continent is a very optimistic continent. Our qualitative research, our engagement on the ground emphasize that sense of optimism. And that sense of optimism, it's a major source of energy when it comes to resilience. So I call on everyone to build on that resilience. It's to the fear of our neighbors in the global north. People do not want to move. People do not want to leave their livelihoods, their land, where they belong. And when they move nearby, because there is always that optimism that one day they can come back home. And as such, we need to reinvent the cooperation between countries, within countries, to further that sense of the continental ambition for the free movement, to further the ambition of the continent. To take away is that as we looked at these hotspots and areas where conflict exists today, and the potential lines of possible community tensions, religious tensions, ethnic tensions, etc. I have to emphasize that now that we have this possibility to look into possible futures, starting at 2025 up to 2050 with incremental 5 years increase down to 5 square kilometers. We have the opportunity to build these blueprints at once, as they could undermine social cohesion.
Camille, we'll probably just have to wrap it up there now. But again, I think the work of ACME is super important. We all look forward to the report coming out. We're starting to sort of run into the time constraints, and I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have their say. So thank you very much for that, Camille. Over to the Acting Director and Manager for Climate and the Green Growth Division within the African Development Bank, Alhamdou Dossuma. Alhamdou, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Super important work of the AFDB, the importance of financing all these objectives is super important. And what I would particularly like to know is what are the practices and lessons learned from the AFD's experience in developing sustainable inclusive growth, particularly with displaced and host communities? And how can governments be supported in accessing the necessary climate funds in order to prevent further climate displacement dynamics, which basically goes back to development? What are the key elements of the AFDB in addressing an increasingly challenging future?
And also for the opportunity to speak on this very important and timely panel discussion. As you already know, climate change has become the highest risk amplifier for economic development and for human insecurity. It is already estimated that at least 10 million people. This also shows that climate vulnerability caused by droughts is a major source of conflict between small-scale farmers and pastoralists, and create the conditions for armed groups to prosper, leading to wider insecurity issues across various countries, as evidenced among the global climate change hotspots, the Sahel and Horn of Africa, for instance, are facing multiple and complex other challenges such as fragility, insecurity, poverty, and environmental degradation, which form part of the triangle of disasters and lead to economic stagnation. In these vulnerable regions, besides climate vulnerability and related displacement, the number of victims, refugees, and displaced people linked to conflicts and terrorist attacks has significantly increased in recent years due to insecurity and proliferation of weapons and terrorist groups. So important to note that in these most vulnerable countries in Africa, the impacts of climate change are disproportionately borne by women and girls due to their dominant responsibilities in domestic chores and caregiving. It is in this context that the African Development Bank, as a key development finance institution in Africa, recognizes the challenges posed by climate change, depletion and degradation of natural resources, and unsustainable use of ecosystems, which all prevent African nations from escaping the climate vulnerability and human insecurity traps. This is why we have adopted as well an ambitious strategic framework on climate change and green growth, which comprises a high-level policy, a long-term strategy, and a 5-year action plan. This framework builds on our experience in supporting our member countries in fragility context, and it is in line with our new strategy for addressing fragility, and thus with a great opportunity to enhance climate action and promote green growth while supporting Africa's development agenda and addressing the fragility challenges the continent is facing. For us at the African Development Bank, we believe that adaptation must be part of the equation of advancing durable solutions in response to the climate displacement nexus. This is because African countries do not have any choice than adapting to the adverse impacts of climate change and to the growing intensity and frequency of climate-related disasters, which undermine their economic prospects and set back their progress towards achieving the SDGs and the Paris Agreement.
Okay, I think we might have lost
In
the...
this regard,
There we go.
we love Adaptation Acceleration Program together with the Global Center on Adaptation. Can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you. The screen just froze for a sec, so please continue, Your Excellency.
Okay. So the program we launched last year together with the Global Center on Adaptation aims to mobilize $25 billion to accelerate and scale up climate change adaptation across Africa in the next 5 years, with an initial commitment of $12.5 billion from the African Development Bank. As part of the program, we are implementing a program called Youth Adapt Challenge, which aims at scaling up promising and transformative youth innovations for climate action through working with youth-led and owned enterprises, 50% of which are women-led SMEs. 15 such youth enterprises were already awarded business grants of up to $100,000 and the opportunity to participate in a 12-month business accelerator program to help them scale up their businesses, deepen their impact, and create decent jobs. This annual competition is open to all African countries, and the first set of winners was announced last year at COP26 in Glasgow. We are currently completing this support with $500 million green SME financing facility, which is under preparation, with the view to increase access to concessional finance for African young entrepreneurs. Another key initiative that we are spearheading include the Africa Climate Smart Agriculture Program, which supports 10 million producers to adopt climate smart agriculture technologies and practices. Another important program for us also is the program for Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, called TAT, which has already leveraged $450 million and provided 90 million farmers in 27 countries with climate resilient agricultural technologies. Let me say here that as we are approaching COP27, It is my hope that we will put forward concrete proposals built on existing initiatives like those I mentioned in order to scale up adaptation actions in Africa while ensuring that adaptation receives the global attention it deserves through the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement. This is imperative for the global community and especially for African nations which need large-scale and inclusive adaptation solutions to protect their most vulnerable people, including women, youth, and displaced communities. For this to happen, African countries need to overcome the multiple barriers that limit their ability to access climate finance, including governance and capacity issues, as well as the lack of bankable project pipelines.
Okay,
Finally,
thank you.
And as we are able to COP27, let me stress that scaling up adaptation funds for transformative adaptation actions and durable solutions is a must to build high resilience and inclusive future. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think the work of the AFDB and the other IFIs is going to be particularly critical in some of the discussions that we had last night. It's becoming increasingly, as the results from Bonn came out, was show us the money. We know the challenges. It's very real, the impacts on Africa, but it's now the situation of how do we support this adaptation that everyone is starting to recognise is so critical. Africa needs that support. So moving on, and this is something which is very important in terms of getting a reality check from the front lines. Hajir Malim, if you're, yep, great to see you, Hajir. Hajir is the Regional Director of the Horn and Eastern Africa for Action Against Hunger. And given the challenges that particularly the Horn and Eastern Africa are facing at the moment, it's super important to have Hajir's perspective on that. So I don't necessarily need to go through the numbers or the challenges, but I'll just get straight into the question, which is, how does Action Against Hunger's programs and activities in the Horn and Eastern Africa enhance displaced communities' access to sustainable sources of food and income, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings? And what are the lessons learned so far, bearing in mind the importance of conflict sensitivity in food security programming? And I might just add, before Hajir starts, that it's just getting worse, like whether we're looking at the situation in Ukraine, whether we're looking at the impact of food security of the host communities. WFP just announced that they'll be looking at reducing by 50% the food rations in many refugee settings. So this is a fairly catastrophic situation on top of an already horrible situation. So Hajir, comments, suggestions for the audience or how we can be taking this further? Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Aswan, for inviting me. Action Against Hunger programs target the most vulnerable communities, often impacted by nutritional crisis, but also displacement due to the food insecurity, but also other vulnerabilities. Our work, therefore, requires us to operate in hard-to-reach areas impacted by multiple crises like conflict, climate change, food crisis, COVID-19, and among others. So please allow me to provide 3 ways in which our programs have enhanced access to sustainable food and source of income for this vulnerable population, while also ensuring immediate access to food through emergency support. 1, recognizing land access is an issue, we developed a model called Optimized Land Use Model that enhances agricultural production, particularly among displaced populations who have very limited access to land. Some countries have been generous to provide, for example, land to refugees, like in Uganda. So taking advantage of these small parcels of land and try and increase household food production. This is designed with a cultural sensitivity into it, taking into consideration the type of shelter that they use, taking into consideration the household labor that will be required to produce these agricultural products, but also looking at the market analysis to ensure that the product they produce can be able to be sold and meet the household income as well. So OLUM, or the Optimized Land Use Model, builds self-reliance. It provides a source of income through climate-smart agricultural practices, but it also allows for diversified household food intake and reduces malnutrition. nutrition as well. Secondly, recognizing that many of the displaced camps, and even in refugees, you find the majority are women and children. We've seen in many of the displacement camps up to 80% sometimes in some areas are women and children. We have identified ways in which we can effectively use the power of women. So by organizing them into groups, we call them mother-to-mother support groups. This allows mothers in groups of 20 to 25 to come together to be able to help one another, not only create sensitization about the issues, but also be an engine for economic development and recovery. What we've seen in many of these contexts is that these small-scale mother-to-mother support groups have the potential for growth that can actually be the foundation for building not only stability in these communities, but also the economic power within these displaced and refugee populations as well. So we have seen these women groups being linked strongly to village savings and loans associations to be able to withstand the shocks brought about by climate change, ensuring that the mother-to-mother support groups are supported with assets and grants that allows them to jumpstart sustainable economic activity as well. So this is very, very important to notice that many of the vulnerable population have the potential, if they are given the limited, just a little bit of an assistance to be able to move forward. They can be able to take care of their own needs without having to rely on food assistance. Thirdly, we're exploring new ways of doing things to adapt to our new realities. We know climate change is a new reality. As a result of that, we have displacement. In this region, in East Africa and the Horn, we have more than 12 million internally displaced, and these numbers continues to increase every year. Our own assessment clearly indicates that majority of these people do not have even the means to return because they have lost their productive assets. Some of them are pastoral dropouts, and they cannot return. And because of the complexity of conflict, that's where the situation even becomes difficult for many of these. So let me just take an example of, we have drought in the Horn of Africa that's resulting in massive vulnerabilities. But in addition to that, we are facing communities where there's flooding as well as a result of the climate change issues. And where these communities used to plant traditional cereal crops in these a little bit drier areas, in flooding, these crops no longer survive. So we had to think a little bit out of the box and change and introduce, for example, in South Sudan, this rice planting in these swampy areas. Though they consume rice, they were importing it instead of growing it because they didn't have the expertise to grow it. So trying to find new ideas and new ways of working to make sure that we can be able to adapt to the realities that we face as well. So let me just end by just saying what are 3 key lessons we have learned in terms of the conflict sensitivity in our food security program. Number 1, there is a stronger case for more to be done to protect community assets. We are not poor per se, but we are getting poorer since our investment gets wiped out with every disaster. Single disaster. Let's say, for example, one drought season in Somalia wipes out more than $2 billion of assets from these very vulnerable communities. Today, in this today's drought, more than 7 million livestock died as a result of the drought in the Horn of Africa. You can do the maths on how much billions that could translate in terms of not only the animals itself, but the economic chain, the value chain of moving livestock across the Gulf and many others and businesses that it operates. So 7 million livestock just wiped out in one season. So it's very, very important to protect these assets. And we know there are many mechanisms of doing this. Secondly, it's very, very important to understand the critical importance of the communities and the gatekeepers within these communities, both as facilitators, but also as barriers, and overcome this. I think a better understanding of local knowledge, adapting our programming to the context, and ensuring that we can also enhance our access to hard-to-reach areas and maintaining presence in these communities over the long term to sustainably address the need is critical. And finally, we'll just end by saying that extensive investment in research, exploring new ways to optimize local food production at community level by maximizing production of non-crop but also introducing more viable new one will be very important. We do have the power to hold our destiny in our own hands, and we should grow. And it's therefore critical that we invest not only in prevention efforts to reduce mass displacement of population, but also address the needs of the increasing levels of population that are already displaced in many forms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haji, for providing a reality check, but also providing concrete recommendations for how we can be addressing some of these issues in the future. And before I pass to Benjamin, like the focus on communities, recognising that many of these communities are under severe stress through the loss of crops, the loss of livestock, just the financial damage that these communities have suffered over these compounded disasters. I love the example of the mother-to-mother support groups. Also, again, something which is continually repeated is the importance of research and optimising that for decision making. So on that note, it's a great segue to Benjamin from Adelphi. Benjamin is the Climate Diplomacy and Security Program person. And so what Adelphi's been looking at is Lake Chad. So just to cut down on the question, in the context of your field experience in the Lake Chad Basin, what are some of the lessons learned so far in attempting to devise durable solutions that contain climate security-related risks, including climate-induced displacement, and address livelihood security issues within displaced communities? And I think there was also an interesting note before as well that there's often a lot of focus on the Lake Chad region, but it's not just Lake Chad. It's also Lake Victoria, it's Southern Africa, so what are the lessons which could also be replicated elsewhere? And so Benjamin is our last speaker. No pressure.
Thanks, Andrew. And yes, I can hear, I can be heard. Thanks, and thanks also to the ASFAN Forum for giving me for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to speak. And I was just thinking, basically what I'm going to say is an endorsement of what Hashir just said. Because what I'm going to talk about, the study we did a few years ago, it's called Shoring Up Stability. We like to think of it as the first ever integrated regional climate fragility risk assessment. And actually I don't have field expertise because we very deliberately worked with local researchers to do the research, and we just synthesized this. But I'll try to channel and synthesize what our findings are. And I got scared a little bit earlier when you said, give me key messages, and I noted down 3. So I'll run through. And the first one would be, and it very much dovetails with what you just said, is we should not assume we already know. And it's something that we learned in the process, because we came in with the sort of international narrative of the shrinking lake being the main problem, and surprisingly we found that's not quite the core of the problem, that the lake has shrunk but is actually now expanding, and that the climate fragility risks that there are, and which are very, very substantial, are more related to the lack of predictability of precipitation, which really makes it hard for farmers to know when to plant, and also the increase in extreme weather events. And of course that makes a difference in terms of the sort of responses you would want to engage in. So that's we shouldn't assume we know before would be number one. Number 2 would be that it's very much the double vulnerability that counts. You asked at the very outset, so what are the problems due? Is it governance? Is it climate? Is it whatever? And there's a nice academic debate going on this. But I think it's when it comes to the situation that the affected communities find themselves in, it's a little bit moot, because they're confronted with both these challenges, and they interact and they interlock. And what we saw in the Lake Chad Basin was that whereas communities in the past used to switch between livelihoods as an adaptation strategy to what was always a quite challenging climate, so between fishing, recessional agriculture, pastoralism, transboundary trade, both the climate impacts and the conflict are making this harder and are undermining resilience and are undermining the ability to adapt, because both close off livelihoods, climate change obviously through not having the natural resources, but the conflict by making lots of areas inaccessible, also by having certain livelihoods declared, this is terror financing, because the communities who are engaging in these livelihoods tend to be associated with armed opposition groups, and then the response being let's interdict the livelihoods, but of course what you do is not conducive to a sustainable solution. So I think here the lesson drawing from that is that really what needs to be done is to build responses, from the ground up, from, as she again said, engaging with communities, knowing their needs and demands, and building this into responses. And actually, from the Lake Chad Basin assessment, we've tried to sort of build this out into a global level methodology and impacts that we call weathering risk for all the risks we are facing, where we're trying to sort of, with a set of core questions, help whoever is trying to respond to these risks, how to do this. And then the final number 3, on the response side, I think one of the very clear learnings was how much this is about building or rebuilding social cohesion. So within communities, between communities, and also between communities and the state. I don't know who of you was here yesterday afternoon for the Nigeria case study, which I thought was just great. If you weren't there, do watch it online again, because it really showed what I think is a very good and very promising response, where the governor of Bono and Bono State and also some Nigerian federal officials emphasized how they've shifted their approach from a sort of more kinetic, terror fighting approach to a softer, less kinetic, much more community engagement focused approach, and with I think huge success. And if that's something that can be sustained and can be built out and others can learn from this, that would be a great success. And I know it's maybe ironic and maybe also a bit rich to, I know it's really hard, and I also know that, obviously we are at the sort of closing stage, I hope, of 20 years of global war and terror, where the West, did not do this, was very kinetic in its approach and royally screwed it up. It's such a failure. So then saying, well, don't do that. It won't lead there. But I think it's also, it's also a case where Africa can do better than the West. So putting these communities at the center of the efforts and focusing on building social cohesion is key, and climate change adaptation and information on climate trends, on weather prediction and so on can be one of the tools of sort of making the state a positive presence in these communities, something that where the state contributes rather than being just an oppressive presence. So from security from certain communities, security for these communities. And that'd be it. Thanks.
That's a great way to wrap up. And I think, like listening to you then, Benjamin, it was almost like we needed to have community peace, community progress, community prosperity, rather than sort of like top down, what is it that we need to be driving up? And maybe ASWAN Forum next year will be sort of community based. So I think that's super important. So we're not too far behind schedule, but I just wanted to wrap up now. I won't go through too much of a conclusion, because I went through the key points as the speakers stated. We won't have chance for the plenary, but I think some of the key elements were reiterated, and that is the community. And it's also about action. It's also about how do we resource the good initiatives that are being undertaken thus far. And you can also basically go down from what what his team is doing in the field. How do we resource those initiatives much more? How do we resource the Namira's team in terms of AU leading data and evidence? How do we support the various ministries, including in Mozambique? Because we know these are the areas that are going to be impacted more and more. It's not that we need to have great early warning systems. The evidence is already there. So it's all about early action, not early action now, it's about action. Action, action, action. And so the sooner that we start moving beyond the talk and the promises and the commitments to actually allowing the communities to take the future into their hands, which was reiterated time and time again, the more that we can actually look at addressing the issues which this panel was tasked to address, which is how do we sustain peace at a time of a climate emergency. So it's, in my view, there's only so much that the communities on the ground can do. They need the help. I would now like just to say thank you, obviously to the government and people of Egypt, but bring it back down to the people who've been helping here. The Cairo International Centre for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding. I was involved last year virtually. It's great to be here to be able to meet them. Omnea and Fahar, thank you very much for putting all this together. Also very much thank you to the interpreters at the back. I know my accent and how I talk is not necessarily the simplest thing in the world, but I'd also just sincerely like to thank the brilliant panelists who are here, but also the teams who they represent, because it's not just the people who speak, it's the people who are on the ground. It's the NGOs, it's the communities, it's the government officials who really do need the help. And unless we can provide that capacity and resources, we're not going to progress. So we're all decision makers. We wouldn't be here if we weren't decision makers. So every step that you decide from now on, even before now, but in the future, has to be seen, how do we support, enhance peace, progress, and prosperity? And what steps can we achieve before COP27? Because as I started out, we have to make this a success. The 26 other COPs haven't been that great. This is African COP. Let's support Africa and make it a success. Thank you.